Welcome to the Alabama Charter School Forum, and thank you to each and every one of you for being here tonight. We're really thrilled about this event. My name is Katie Moss. I am the Director of Policy and Research for Unlocked UA. At the very core of Unlocked's mission is the notion that to everything that we do, we want to be nuanced and bring both sides of the story. So we're so lucky this evening to have 4 panelists and an excellent moderator who are going to bring you all of the perspectives surrounding the charter school movement. Up on the board, you'll see that there is a hashtag Alabama Charter Forum, or AL Charter Forum. We want this to be an interactive event, and we want you to be able to ask the panelists questions that might arise as the panel continues. So you can tweet at this hashtag, but if you don't have a Twitter or your cell phone is dead or anything like that, we give each and every one of you a note card with your program. If you have a question, go ahead and write it down and just hold it up. There's exec members around the room who will collect them. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Westbrook. He is the director of the Blackburn Institute here on campus. Once again, thank you for coming. I hope you enjoy your evening.
Again, welcome. We're pleased to have our guest with us this evening. I want to take a moment and introduce each person and let each person share just a moment or two why you're here and your background and your perspective on education. So we will begin with Dr. Joyce Stallworth, who is the special assistant to the Provost and professor of education here at the University of Alabama. Dr. Stallworth.
Thank you, sir. Good evening. I still consider myself first and foremost a public school educator. I taught in rural Alabama, rural South Alabama, and then started my path toward becoming ready to enter higher education as a faculty member, first at Alabama A&M University, and now in my 19th year here at the University of Alabama. And I'm simply here to engage in a healthy discussion of different approaches to K-12 schooling. We've all had some form of K-12 schooling, and we have different opinions about that, primarily based on our experiences in those systems, whether it was a private school, public school, charter school, whatever. And so I'm interested to hear some different opinions, especially from you as young people who will be the tax-paying citizens who are responsible parents and family members who have to figure out what the best structure is for your children. So I'm happy to be here, and I'm sure that we will have some good discussion, and hopefully that you will be engaged in it as well.
Dr. Barbara Rountree, who's a professor emeritus from the University of Alabama, and also the director of the Capital School here in Tuscaloosa, founded to be the first charter school in the state of Alabama. It has been a private school for the past 20 years. Dr. Rountree?
So the first thing you'll have to do is not trust my judgment, because back in 1993, we thought we'd be the first charter school in the state of Alabama. Small schools started by a group of public school teachers, and we certainly misjudged the political climate in this state. You know, Florida has charter school legislation, Georgia, Tennessee, Mississippi has kind of a pitiful one, but you know, we're surrounded, but not Alabama. It's never passed. I'm a native of Alabama, taught in public schools for 25 years, and taught here at the university for 22. So.
Ms. Emily Schultz, who's the Executive Director of the Alabama Coalition for Public Charter Schools.
Sure. Thank you all so much for having me. So before I accepted this role about 3 months ago, I served as Governor Bentley's Education Policy Advisor for 2 years. I'm a native of Birmingham, left for college, didn't think I was going to be coming back so soon. I worked for the DC Public Schools. I worked out in California for San Francisco Unified, and then I was in Atlanta as a teacher before that. So I'm really excited to be here, and I'm really excited to engage with these folks about such an important topic.
Thank you. Ms. Amy Hubbard Marlowe, who is the Research and Information Systems Manager for the Alabama Education Association.
Like Emily, I want to thank you all for just inviting me to be here tonight. And I have to say, before we get started, just one thing. As a proud alum of the University of Alabama, it gives me so much hope for the future to see all of you out here tonight. The campus doesn't look anything like it did when I was in school here, and the facilities that you've got and the bright and shining faces and just all the hope, and I know the new ideas that you've got are going to be critical as we move forward, not just as the state of Alabama, but throughout the nation as well, especially in the areas of public education. You know, the one constant in life is change, and as you get older, you're going to find that out, that nothing stays the same. you can always count on change coming into every aspect of your life. And I think we're certainly at a point now in the public school system in this state and in this country where we've got to look for new ideas to engage the students of the future. And I'm looking forward to having this discussion with you tonight and taking some ideas, some of the things that you've thought of in your studies and as you move forward into your future careers that can benefit public education for everybody.
To begin with this evening, let's talk about what is a charter school and is it a public school? I know that there are many different definitions and interpretations, so let's start with the foundation of how do you define a charter school? Dr. Stallworth?
Okay, no, we don't have to start with me. When I read that question, I did some reflection, and for me, a public school, first of all, that was the first question, what is a public school? And of course, we all know public schools are educational institutions that are mandated by local and state regulations. It's governed by, in our case, Alabama State Department of Education. It's free education. It is free education for all, regardless of SES, regardless of any kind of geographic differences, whatever. It's a free public education for all. I don't think charter schools qualify as public schools by the very nature. It is not free, or it's not for all. You have many different instances of charter schools, and I'm sure we'll get into some of the better examples across this country, whether it's from New York or Texas or Indianapolis, where I think the charter school movement kind of started. So those are all instances where there is some kind of choice, some kind of program, some kind of theme where certain students are attracted, certain students and their families are attracted to those schools. And so public schooling is free K-12 education.
We'll bounce down. Ms. Marlowe?
Public school, and I also am a native of the state of Alabama, and I think when I think of public schools, I think of the community schools where I was raised and where I'm raising my children right now in Sylacauga. Thomas Jefferson said that our public schools are the anvil upon which our democracy is forged, and I think if you really think about that, it echoes what Dr. Stallworth just mentioned. Public education is for everyone. Every child in the state of Alabama, in this country, has a right to an education, and the public school system was created to make sure that all of our society, that all of our citizens were educated. By contrast, I also agree with her that a charter school, based on my definition, and I'm not necessarily locked into just my definition, but in my definition, they do exclude. They have certain parameters or certain litmus tests that have to be administered before students are admitted. And it therefore does not create a level playing field with what we know as our public schools today.
Dr. Rountree?
The charter schools that I visited across the country all had to use the federal lottery system. So in those cases, they were all free schools with their funding from the state, and children got to come to that school by lottery because the demand was greater. Each of these schools were designed as a public school, but not under the local board. So see, that's a big difference. Our city schools are under the Tuscaloosa City Board of Education. Our county schools are under the Tuscaloosa County Board of Education. So these schools, someone once described them to me more like a free agent in baseball. You know, you might report to a state board. So these were created to be very different. Some I visited were in the basement of a YMCA, and they met the needs of kids who dropped out of school. Another, so one in Kentucky is in the French language. So, yes, not everybody would choose to go to school in French, but obviously there were enough that chose to go to that school.
Ms. Schultz?
Sure. So I'm glad Amy just talked about the different definitions of charter schools, because charter schools are really what they look like in each state is determined by that state's legislation. So there are definitely opportunities for Alabama being one of the only 8 states in the country that doesn't have public charter schools. There's an opportunity there to learn from other states where they've made mistakes, where their successes have been. So my definition, charter schools are public schools because they're funded by local, state, and federal dollars. They are open enrollment, and meaning that they have to take anyone that wants to come. I think one of the conversations that often comes up when we talk about charter schools is magnet schools. And we consider those public schools, and those are application-based. You do have to demonstrate capacity in certain areas to gain entrance into a magnet school. So we have different levels of enrollment for our public schools, and charter schools are open enrollment.
And it's Joyce, please, not Dr. Stallworth. But Emily, what you just said, it's open enrollment. Help me understand that a little bit more, that any charter school would accept any student if that student doesn't either, I don't make it through the lottery, so I'm going to show up to school and I can go there.
So typically, with a charter school application, an applicant applies to their authorizer, and they set a number, so they have identified a space, and they say the capacity of this building is 300 people, so we have 300 places. They have an enrollment period, just like you do with traditional district schools, and they all come when you're enrolling for the next year, the summer, and they set boundaries for when you come, you articulate that you want to come, and then if they go beyond that 300 number, they have to, hold an open public lottery where they choose. Randomly administered.
Right. But again, if 55 students show up and they reach their capacity of 300, they take those 55, or whether it's another 250, or whether it's 1,000.
Right.
Okay.
Let's talk about the fact that every state defines public schools through its legislation. And last year, Alabama's legislature, under the leadership of Governor Bentley, attempted to pass a legislation to allow public charter schools. Will you explain how Alabama was going to define public school based on that legislation, or define a charter school based on that legislation?
Sure. So we were going to, and this is where I say we can learn from the practices of other states, because I'll be the first to tell you that charter schools are not the silver bullet. We need all different kinds of strategies. We need what's going on with flexibility. We need what's going on around teacher preparation. There's all kinds of strategies we need, and so there's many different ways to kind of define a charter school. So in the 2012 legislation, it went through a number of iterations. we'll all remember that. But the original bill that was proposed required a group of people that wanted to start a charter school to apply to the local district, and then if they were rejected, they could appeal to a statewide council. The statewide council and all local districts, as authorizers, were accountable to the State Board of Education. They had to demonstrate their capacity and competency as an authorizer through being held accountable to the state board. There was some pretty strong language in there that we took from other states that had amended their legislation to ensure that they were open enrollment, that they were not practicing any sort of discrimination in enrolling students. That's kind of the high level.
Ms. Marlowe, AEA worked very hard to defeat this legislation. Can you explain why you took a stand that this was not good legislation?
Well, the version that Emily just referred to, and by the way, I actually met Emily when we started this first, I guess, in 2012, and people would be amazed how much we think alike. So I was very interested in coming here tonight because I read in the unlocked description that we would get outside the typical political narrative, because you want to think, well, Governor Bentley's charter school person was pushing the legislation and AEA killed it, so they must come from opposite ends of the earth, but we really don't. The reason why we were against that version is because AEA believes that the strength of our community schools lies in local control. And in that version, you heard Emily say that if the local school board decided that they didn't want to try to start some type of charter model, that a citizen could go around the local school board to the State Board of Education. And that was the linchpin there for us, because we truly believe that the future success of our community schools lies with local control. And that would have taken the control away from the local school board and given it to the State School Board of Education.
Dr. Rountree, you talked about being surprised politically back in 1993 that this environment was so opposed to charter schools. Why do you think it is such a controversial topic and so hotly debated?
Well, I'll kind of give you my thinking of why I was surprised, is because twice this state has created what I would call a charter school. And it's a line item in the state budget. In 1968, was the first funding for the Alabama School of Fine Arts in Birmingham. And then that kind of went through several different ones in 1972, and then in 1989, I guess, the Alabama School of Math and Science was created. So in both of those instances, state funding, and the Alabama School of Math and Science, I looked, $6 million in this year's budget. A school was created outside of the local boards of education, and they were created for a very specific purpose. To, you know, in that case, it's a free public school in Mobile where you can live as your sophomore, junior, and senior year of high school and major in math and science. So, you know, that was kind of the climate of what was happening that made me think we, maybe as a state, were ready to look at some things. Now, local school boards have to take training to learn more about how to be an effective school board, but that was certainly not the case in you know, 1993. So it was very difficult to get a local school board to change or to do things differently than the phrase I always heard was, that's not the way we've always done it.
Dr. Stallworth, how would you respond to Dr. Rountree saying that the School of Fine Arts and the School for Math and Science are similar to charter schools?
Well, I think that there are some similarities. I mean, as you said, state-funded residential schools for a very small population of our state, not by invitation, but by application, right? And so I think those are examples of different ways to do public education in this state. I think that, I don't know, some of the challenges of creating this whole idea, this whole notion of these local charter schools, again, the impact on students of color, the impact on, again, I'm from a very rural county, and I think some of the backlash, you talked about AEA's opposition, I think some of those local principals too said, wait a minute, you know, what is that going to mean for the way that we do things? And certainly, I would be the first to say that we've got to be more innovative in public schools across this entire state. But I just don't think that I don't think that I've seen enough sound rationales. I mean, I don't know what kind of surveys we've done in this state of taxpaying citizens. What do you know? How much do you know? And then what does that look like in your community, whether it's in Vestavia Hills competing with a charter school, or whether it's in Evergreen, Alabama, or Monroeville, Alabama? What are the needs that our local school systems are not meeting that would dictate a charter school doing it better or differently with the same demographics, with the same, I don't know what kind of teachers would attract there. But I agree with you. Again, those are two examples of, in effect, public schools that are different. I wouldn't call them charter schools. I still wouldn't call those two examples charter schools, but they're different ways of educating students around certain themes. The magnet school here, that's a different kind of setting that draws students from our local school system, the Tuscaloosa City system, for a particular program there. I think Alberta City will be opening as a fine arts school. I think, Barbara, is that right? Yeah. Here. So, that will be a population of students that are drawn to that. So the capacity to create all of these levels of charter schools in this state, I just don't understand where we are with addressing needs that are unmet. If that makes any sense.
I want you to be thinking about two different issues related to charter schools and hear from our different panelists. The first one is how are charter schools funded and how might it impact the local schools in the community where the charter schools exist? And the second one is how would you respond to concerns that the charter school may siphon off the top students or may lead to some sort of segregation based on race, socioeconomic level, or ideology? Go ahead.
So first, okay, a lot of questions in there. So first question: how are public charter schools funded? So again, depends on the state, depends on how it's set up. But ideally, the kind of model law that the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools supports has the money following the student. So you have the per pupil expenditure that the state makes on that student, and then the local match, or not match, but the local contribution that the district makes following that student to the charter school. So then the charter school would receive that money for the student. And some states will say the charter school gets 80% of the per pupil, so they will tier it differently to accommodate the expenses that a district has to take on that don't necessarily have to do directly with serving the child, but their overhead costs or their fixed costs.
Ms. Marlowe, I know that AEA has taken some strong stands on behalf of the teachers and administrators who are members against charter schools related to the fact that it may take money away from the local schools. Explain why people perceive it that way.
Absolutely. Well, the legislation that we were presented with, and then also what morphed into last year's Accountability Act, which is a topic for maybe a different forum, followed the example that Emily mentioned about in Alabama. And let me say this, most people don't realize that in Alabama, we have the largest state funding per pupil of any other state in the country as far as the percentage of the amount of money that comes from the state. In other states and other local school districts, like let's say Georgia for example, you would have local funds that would fund the schools based on the community where the school was located. In Alabama, almost all of the funding in public education comes from the state, which is why some of these issues are so hotly debated down in Montgomery and not back in your local school district, because the state money is the majority of, even Mountain Brook, is the majority of the money that they have available to spend in their schools, so all the decisions concerning that money are made in Montgomery. We have a funding formula in Alabama where the schools, the local community schools are funded based on the number of students who attend those schools. So that funding formula is in place. The legislation that we were presented with would have had a charter school that would be instituted in a local school system and would pull the ADM, the money from the ADM, the students that had previously attended, let's say the local high school the previous year. The local high school is still going to be open. The local high school has still got to have classrooms and lights and a principal and buses and a lunchroom, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But they're going to be operating with less funds because the charter school legislation that was proposed in 2012 would have taken that funding. For every student that went to the local charter school, the funding would have followed them. So then you would have been left with the school that would not have had the funding to operate.
So let's talk about the funding following the student. And Dr. Stallworth, if students choose to go to this charter school and the charter school chooses to accept these students, how might that selection of students impact the local schools in terms of race, class, just ideology?
Yeah, I hear so many people, and this has been an argument, especially when I was still teaching regularly, that you can't just throw money at the problem. Well, I just haven't seen a low-performing, good school with good principals, good teachers, and good resources and a rigorous curriculum. So yeah, you have to throw money at the problem. You have to throw money wisely. I had a conversation earlier today. I was in Birmingham at an event, and a KIPP teacher who is from Houston, Texas, was there. And of course I engaged her in conversation. She's been at this KIPP school. It's right outside of Houston, in Dixon, Texas. And I asked her, well, now help me understand the funding for your school in Houston, Texas. And she said, well, she said the first thing she said was external funding, fundraising, and then from foundations and others. She didn't mention initially money that came from, again, the public school allocation. And so I think that's a big difference too. Public schools don't fundraise on that level. Of course, you sell cookies and you make $5, but you don't make millions of dollars, and you don't attract those kinds of funding mechanisms, the Gates money or other kinds of large philanthropy. So again, I think that's one thing that separates the way that many states, and again, I don't know how it would look in Alabama. Emily certainly could fathom, could project how it might look in Alabama, but for so many other states, that's a huge chunk of the funding. So that funds specialized programs, that funds new teacher units, that funds programs after school, extended day, extended hours, and that's another thing that Hope said, that one of the differences, again, she's been at this particular KIPP school for 2 years, and she was teaching at a traditionally public school, independent school district in Houston earlier, that the extended day and teachers have extended contracts, so they're making a little bit more money. So, I think money, it funds the programs. It doesn't solve the problem, so certainly you have to have money to have a well-funded program. where students' imaginations are unlocked. So otherwise, you're left with poorly funded public schools in Wilcox County. And I don't know what a charter school in Wilcox County would look like, taking 80% of the money from Wilcox County High School.
Dr. Rountree, as a private school now, how would passing legislation allowing charter schools to exist in Alabama impact the Catholic school?
Well, of course, it depends on what the legislation looks at like, but right now the state spends what, $4,100 per pupil?
4,300.
4,300, okay.
Close.
So what we're talking about is every child, you know, gets a per pupil expenditure of $4,300 from the state Alabama Department of Revenue earmarked for education. So last year when they opened the new Sipsey Valley High School and kids left County High to go there because the zone was drawn there, then that meant Sipsey Valley got that per pupil expenditure for those pupils instead of the high school. So when a child leaves elementary school and goes to a middle school, that money would follow that child to middle school. So that's the way it's always been in Alabama. So if there was settling charter school legislation tomorrow, then the children who had their name pulled out of a lottery, a bingo thing, you know, that their number came up, would go to that charter school, and that money would follow that child.
Let me ask this to you. Then many people would receive what you described as vouchers rather than a charter school. So how would you distinguish between the two?
Well, I don't think that vouchers will ever happen in the state of Alabama, so.
Yeah, that voucher fee is for private school education or whatever.
You can spend that wherever you want.
So how is that different than a charter school in which a child can take the public money and go to wherever he or she wants?
But it has to be a public school that meets all the criteria that,
and
you know, to accept the child.
Mm-hmm.
And also, if I can just, a voucher is choice for choice's sake. A public charter school, one of the things we haven't talked about yet is the accountability that goes into, charter schools get to operate with an amazing amount of flexibility in a number of areas. And in exchange for that, they agree to really high levels of accountability. So they say if they are not performing at a certain level that they agree to with their authorizer, then they're closed. And that's the reality of that level of accountability. A voucher is you are giving money to a private school, and then you don't know how that student performs. You don't know if it's a better educational experience for that student. With charter schools, that choice, that money following the child is because a parent and that family decided that they weren't getting what they needed at the school they were zoned for, and they decided to choose to go to another school.
Let's go back to the second part of what I mentioned I want you to think about. In the notion that you're pulling out potentially the most engaged students and families from the public schools from the regular public school for a public charter school, and the allegation that it could lead to racial segregation, that it could lead to socioeconomic segregation in a lot of communities. How would you respond to that?
Well, one, I would say I think that's a problem that we need to talk about bigger than just charter schools. That's a phenomenon that happens in our traditional district setting. With the relationship I described earlier of a charter school applying to a local district, if they are approved by the local district, they can serve any child in that district. So you have a charter school, and I'm most familiar with Birmingham, but if you had a charter school in Birmingham, they could pull from any part of Birmingham. So Crestwood to any neighborhood in Birmingham, so you're creating opportunities for more diversity. Birmingham's an incredibly segregated system anyway. It's 96% African American, but it's also an extremely high rate. I don't know I haven't seen the most recent free and reduced price lunch numbers, but a very high number of students qualify for free and reduced price lunch. So I think there's a broader conversation that we have to have about kind of the segregation in the Jefferson County area. But I would also go back to the point that charter schools are open enrollment. They have to take whoever wants to come within the capacity limits.
Let me ask this question. You said they have to take whoever wants to come. If you have a special needs child, it's a fear and profound child.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Does the charter school have to accept that child?
Yes. Absolutely. And I do want to address that because early on, charter school started in 1991 in Minnesota. That was the first law that was passed, and there were mistakes made in some of the first laws that were enacted. Absolutely, and actually, Mississippi just passed a much better version of their law about 3 months ago, and they are just now getting things up. And I worked very closely watching their law, and that you can include the most recent charter school laws that have passed have included very strong language requiring charter schools to meet the special education needs.
Let's talk about that a little bit more. Dr. Rountree, you're operating a private school. Do you have any severe and profound students at this time?
But see, we don't have any testing. We don't do anything. I was chair of the multiple ability program here at the University of Alabama, so guess what? We're a multiple ability school.
So when we're talking about how we fund students, and we say that the state spends $4,300 on each child from the state funds, and that's the amount of money that the charter school will receive, we also know that different children cost different amounts of money to educate, and many severe and profound students may cost $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 per child to educate. So how would the funding model potentially meet the needs of severe and profound students, and is that financially possible?
Just going to share an anecdote that we educate some students from public schools who send us their funding to educate their children because we think we can do that education. So we've had children graduate, with hearing profound hearing loss, that kind of thing. So we think that we can educate them maybe in a little different way and maybe a cheaper way.
Dr. Stallworth, in terms of an academic perspective, what are the pros and cons of charter schools? Can you tell us some of the research that would back and support, and some of the research that may not support?
I'm sure all of us are familiar with so many of them. I mean, you got the good charter schools, you got the bad charter schools, you have the good public schools, you have the bad public schools. I mean, you think about, I go back to always thinking in terms of a rigorous curriculum and motivated teachers, instructional leaders who are principals, who are assistant principals, who are librarians, etc. So when that charter school has those, and when that charter school, whatever the accountability, what are the results? And of course, in public schools, we test. And that seems to be the only model, especially in Alabama, where a school can prove, if you will, that it's meeting the academic standards by the State Department of Education. So I don't know what that looks like in charter schools because I haven't done as much research as others in determining, what is a good charter school? Well, those students graduate 90% and they go to college. Those are some outcomes that they score in the X percentile on standardized testing, whatever that state's testing system mechanisms might be. So I'm certainly not against charter schools just because they're charter schools. We're talking specifically what that would look like in the state of Alabama, and I'm just not convinced. And I know, 8 states, so Alabama's always the last, I guess, to come on board. But I think that we can talk about flexibility. Emily talked about that. Are there ways that this new legislation from our state government will allow public schools some flexibility to show what they might do with, again, creative ways of approaching teaching and learning? So I don't mean to ramble, but I just can't say black and white, what would a good charter school in this state look like? Of course, we have many examples, and I just talked about KIPP. I think that it does an amazing job for traditionally underserved students, and all of you probably know something about that. And there are so many different options, and I think that families really need to be engaged in making those decisions for their children. Again, I have no children. I've been involved in education my entire life, and I think that we always have to be more open-minded. That's certainly one of the reasons I'm here, to try to become more open-minded, David, in looking at, again, different options, different approaches. So whether it's a magnet school, private school, public school, charter school, make those options, and parents can, and families can, not just parents, but families, because our kids are not raised by 2 parents these days, but families can be educated and make informed decisions about what the best paths. But for me, that fallback is always the public school because it's free, And I haven't met a parent or a family member yet, an aunt, uncle, grandparent, great-grandparent, who doesn't want the best for his or her child. And so I think it's crucial to try to engage all of them in helping them, facilitating, not sympathizing, but empathizing and helping them make those best decisions that they can for their kids, and then making sure that those choices are available for all students, again, regardless of what zip code you live in, and how we can do a better job in that. And again, I think we still have the capacity in this state to make those improvements within the existing structure. Barbara, probably disagrees with me, and that's great.
Let's talk about the fact that Ms. Schultz has referred to heightened expectations for charter schools, or we talked about less bureaucracy and more freedom for charter schools to operate. If that is what's needed to help schools do a better job, why is it we don't change that across the board for all schools?
Right.
And that's what we just did last year. In the original version of the charter bill in 2012, AEA was opposed to the establishment of the charter school program, but we supported the flexibility that was included in the bill to give local school systems what they needed to be able to do some of the innovative things that we were hearing that they were already doing anyway, so that they could legally do some of these things.
Do we have some examples of that? What schools are starting to do that?
So 3 applications submitted, I believe.
And that came out of the Accountability Act, the
Right.
Flexibility Act.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yes.
Calhoun.
And that, so I think that they're, one of the challenges, and Amy mentioned this, and we've talked about this at length, but the capacity of districts, right as we were talking about the first iteration that I was involved in, the charter school bill, Birmingham City local school board was having some challenges. And
challenges, that's mine.
Well, and so I think there was this conversation going about how do we empower local districts, how do we give them more flexibility, and we had this district that was dissolving with adults kind of, they're fighting, and it was a very dysfunctional body, and so there was this parallel conversations about empowering them more with more flexibility. While they couldn't handle the money they had, they couldn't handle some of the decisions that they currently had. On the flip side, there are school boards and there are superintendents that are just visionary and could do amazing things without some of the constraints and regulations that they have. And so I think that we need both. I think we need flexibility in the traditional district system, and I think we need flexibility in the form of charter schools.
Let's talk a little bit about the organizations that and the perspective you're coming from. So, Ms. Marlowe, briefly, what is the mission of AEA and who funds you?
Who funds us?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's a good question.
Very briefly.
The mission statement of AEA is every child, every opportunity, which fits right into what we've been talking about tonight. And we might disagree sometimes on how we get there, but I think everybody here agrees that every child in this state deserves every opportunity that we could possibly afford them. Who pays for AEA? We are a membership organization of over 100,000 members throughout the state of Alabama who are employed with local schools, school teachers, school superintendents. Anybody that's employed in a public school system in Alabama is allowed to become a member of AEA, and most do. The most controversial funding that we have is what's called our A-Vote. That's our PAC. You'll be hearing a lot more about that in this year because it's an election year. And one thing that I think most people don't realize is that A-Vote, the Alabama Voice of Teachers and Educators, we can't take money, we can't raise money from anyone else except for a dues-paying member, which means that we've got school bus drivers, teachers, school superintendents that are paying $3 a month so that they can have a collective voice when it comes to issues, political issues regarding public education in this state. We can't go have a fundraiser from the casinos or any kind of private entrepreneur in Birmingham or even in DC to raise money. Every penny of A-Vote money is money that came out of the pockets of a public education employee in the state of Alabama.
Okay, and Ms. Schultz, you're part of a new organization, the Alabama Coalition for Public Charter Schools. You talked about there are many ways that we can improve public education, and that charter schools are just one. Yet there's an organization that is completely focused on charter schools. So what is your mission and who funds you?
So our mission, brand new 501c3. Our application is in. We don't know how long the IRS is going to take to approve it. But we were formed about 6 months ago, and they hired me 3 months after that. And so our mission is to ensure that every child in Alabama has access to a high-quality public school option. We're focused. And I'll be, completely honest. There's a large school choice umbrella out there that involves conversations about the Accountability Act and vouchers, and we are very focused on public charter schools. That's our mission and that's our vision. And so we are funded. We are new, so we're fundraising from individuals in Alabama. So we have received some startup funding from the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools, but it's very small.
You're a private school. Who funds you?
That's right. The parents' tuition. So we are starting our 21st year. I thought we'd only be a private school for 3 years at the most. So here we are, still a private school. Parents pay the tuition. We have a tithe of 10% of our children who receive scholarship help. Everybody pays something, even if it's $5 a month. So we have about 160 students, and our mission statement is educating responsible citizens.
It's time to move to the participation part of this conversation, and there are a few questions. First of all, let's find out who's in the room. How many of you in this room at some point in your K through 12 careers attended a public school? Okay. How many of you in this room at some point during your K through 12 experience attended a charter school? Now there are 3 options to this next question. I'm going to ask you where do you stand on charter schools? I want to know if you are for, if you're undecided, or if you're against. And it's okay for you not to vote, but I want to know where you stand in this room and just get an idea of the perspectives. How many of you in this room support the notion of charter schools? How many of you in this room are undecided? How many of you in this room are opposed to charter schools? Fascinating. We're ready for some questions. Thank you. Can you elaborate on the competitive aspect of charter schools and how it helps them perform so well academically? Emily, would you like to take that one?
Read it one more time.
Sure. Can you elaborate on the competitive aspect of charter schools and how it helps students to perform better?
So I think one of the benefits of charter schools is that they can act almost as pilot or labs for innovative strategies. So some of those techniques that we know work, longer school days, longer school years, especially with underserved populations, those were piloted in public charter schools, and eventually a lot of districts have embraced those strategies. So I think that's one benefit. There's some exchange of best practices that can happen. And I'll be candid that there's not a ton of data to back this up. A lot of charter school proponents say that the competition will force traditional district schools to get better. The data does not play that out.
Not at all.
So I want to be completely honest about that. I don't think it's the primary objective of public charter schools is to drive a district school to be better. I think it's to be the best school that they can be.
Marlowe, this question is for you. Can you explain in further detail why local control is crucial for future educational success?
I think it's a tendency that we see throughout our society today with the, y'all are here, you've all got your mobile devices, you've all got your iPads or tablets or whatever, and when, not that long ago, when I was a student sitting here, we didn't even have the internet. We didn't have, a computer took up an entire room somewhere, and that really wasn't that long ago. So as we become a more mobile society, we tend not to necessarily have loyalties that we once had, community loyalties that we once had the way we had before we had all the modern technology that's so wonderful right now. So we believe that if we're going to keep our strong local schools, that we've got to have community control, local control by leaders in those communities guiding the way that they want the education system to go in their area. In Mobile, for instance, they might not have some of the same things that they would like for their students to learn or to participate in, as opposed, say, maybe to Huntsville, where there might be a greater initiative on the space program, or just, you know, you never know, just what is important to a local community and what they want to see out of their local schools. Without that local support, we do know, though, if we don't have that, the further and further and further away we're pulled from local control, then the public will just become disinterested in the school system, and we'll go to a more private model.
Let's follow up Dr. Stallworth, and this question is, do you think that charter schools could function better or differently in rural, suburban, and city environments? Might they look different in different environments?
I think it would definitely look different in different environments. Again, the data show, data is plural, so data show inconclusively, I think the findings are still inconclusive, even after, since 1991, again, that some are good, some are bad. And I think it's incumbent upon us in the state of Alabama, again, at the local level, to understand those data and then, you know, make some informed decisions. But I think, of course, it would look differently. That it already does. I mean, rural Minnesota or St. Paul, it looks different than it would in New York City. I think that's already apparent, and the data show that. But yeah, again, well, I'll make that at my conclusion.
Dr. Rountree, there's a concern that charter schools would take away the best teachers from the regular public schools. What are your thoughts?
Well, my vision of a charter school is if you said, you know, we're going to have a school and we're going to learn Spanish, half the day is going to be in Spanish, and we're going to wear uniforms, and we have a very focused goal, and this is what we're going to do, and this is our goal for our test scores and whatever, then I think only the people who would choose to teach that would choose to teach in that particular charter. So I think, but when you do get like minds together and they're all focused and working together, you know, you do tend to get better results. So that's an issue.
Are teachers credentialed? All teachers must be credentialed in public charter schools?
It depends on the state. And some, it goes everywhere across the spectrum. From you don't have to have any sort of certification to teach in a charter school. Right. I think Tennessee, it's the percentages. I believe it's 60% of your teachers have to be certified. To every teacher in the building has to be certified. So no standard. I mean, not standard, but no standardized way to mandate. I mean, there are no. Not from the federal level, no. Yeah. No. And I'm not saying anything that credential. What does that mean? In some states, you know, it means more than others. But what are some standards for teachers to show that they have the capacity to teach well?
Like, for instance, when we started ours, we thought we'd be a state public school, so every one of our teachers are credentialed. Now, I did spend 22 years in the College of Ed credentialing teachers to suddenly think you don't have to have a teaching certificate. But we're the only private school in the state of Alabama where every faculty member has an Alabama teaching certificate. Now, would you go to a lawyer that hadn't passed the Alabama bar? Would you go to a doctor that hadn't, you know, become credentialed in the state of Alabama? I'm stunned. Absolutely.
Let's follow up with Ms. Schultz with a question. You were talking about higher standards for students in charter schools and the fact that there are high expectations for the school as a whole in terms of student achievement. Is it fair to have expectations of the students when some charter schools may not have as high of expectations of the teachers in terms of credentials?
Is it okay? So
is it reasonable?
Well, the accountability for a charter school is at the school level. I mean, they have to demonstrate that they are effective in meeting the needs of students. And so I think that, is it fair to hold them accountable? Yes, I think it is. And I think what you're saying, the model you're setting up is you have the flexibility to get there however you need to, but you got to get here. I mean, that's the model.
One of the things that I appreciate so much about the charter schools is that they come with an expiration date. If you can't get your kids to this level of achievement in 3 years, you lose your charter and your funding.
Right. And can I just also, I think that there is an opportunity that we don't talk about a lot for educators with charter schools. And really, there is so much opportunity and kind of the flexibility we can create in the traditional system, but also with charter schools, I think a lot of the frustration, when I was the governor's policy advisor, I was committed to spending 1 day a week in a public school system. And I would go either with the superintendent, I would give them the option if they wanted to walk with me, or they could just let me go, whatever, and I got the gamut. But I think that the kind of theme that went through, and the governor's teacher cabinet shared this as well, that they felt so just restricted by either mandates or regulations or rules that they didn't feel empowered professionally. They didn't feel like they could do what they knew how to do. And so I think that there's a lot of opportunity for educators and people, professional teachers and professional educators to be able to do what they know they need to do.
Ms. Marlowe, would AEA be supportive of charter schools if they reported directly to the local school boards?
That's a great question, and actually in the first version of the charter school bill, that was one of the things that we put on the table. And let me say something, we have not mentioned this here tonight. The charter school, if Emily Schultz could run every charter school in the state and they would be in her vision of exactly what she wants to do, we have full faith and confidence in everything that Emily wants to do. The 800-pound gorilla in the room is that what we were talking about in 2012 and what we have not discussed tonight are for-profit charter schools. And that is where, very few, you're wanting public charter schools. The reason why the 2012 legislation eventually failed is not because AEA killed it, it's because we took the profit margin out. No one was going to make a penny off of a charter school in the state of Alabama, and all of a sudden the sponsors weren't interested in anymore and pulled off. And then the next year, which was the 2013 session, we came back and had the Accountability Act because we took the for-profit margin out of there. Those for-profit charter schools, that is really where the linchpin in all of this is. And we didn't really discuss that here tonight.
Well, let's follow up.
We talked about best case scenario, which I agree with everything these ladies have said.
Let's talk about for-profit charters. Ms. Schultz, does your organization support for-profit charters?
My organization supports effective charter schools. So about 12% of charter operators in the country are for-profit, meaning that they get the same amount of money from the state. They get the same amount of money, and then they invest it or do whatever they do to make a profit off of it. It doesn't cost the state anymore. They're held to the same accountability standards.
So how do you respond when a citizen says, you're making money off of the children that you could invest in their education?
I say a couple things. One, is that child getting a better experience in that school? Because that's where I'd like the focus of the conversation to be. The second thing is, if we're going to have a problem with for-profit contractors or people working, we've got a lot of different, we got Hutt Mifflin, we got textbook companies, we've got a lot of people that are making money off of public dollars.
We haven't had textbook money since 2008. So.
Well, yeah. But I mean, there's a lot of for-profit. There's software designers. There's districts buying computers. There's all kinds of places where for-profit contractors. Model legislation. The best practice is that a 501c3 has to hold the charter. So they have to form a local 501c3 board, and if they choose to contract with a for-profit operator, which again is about 12% across the country, they still have to be held to the same accountability standards. I absolutely understand the discomfort with that relationship. It's a new construct. We don't talk about it a lot, but we should, and I'm glad Amy brought it up because it's something we couldn't dig on.
That's a great question. Talking about public schools being the anvil of our democracy, and I'm going to go back to this side, and Dr. Stallworth, and let you respond to this. Do we have for-profit fire departments or police departments or essential government services, and how would for-profit schools that are being paid for by a taxpayer dollar fit into a new notion?
Yeah, I don't know how that would look. I just don't understand how the accountability would look and what the profits go into bonuses and salaries for X, Y, Z people at the school. And I just don't think that fits with my conception of what free public education means.
I know that the research has been mixed, and thank you. We're talking about the fact that it's not about competition, it's about improving the quality of education for the students who are served. The students who are served, how can charter schools get better achievement from the students that they serve? What can charters do that public schools can't?
So they have some operational flexibility. Again, this is based on what the state's like. It's really hard to paint, just like it is with district schools. It's hard to paint a broad brush. But they have flexibility in curriculum and budget and staffing that traditional district schools don't.
And they can require parental involvement, which every school we go to, every school that I visit with educators, they say if they could have the same guaranteed parental involvement as charter schools are allowed to require, then they could achieve the same results.
The next question is, would the standards for accountability rely on the same test or standards as for public schools? Because you're wanting to compare apples to apples. So how would you compare a charter school and its achievement?
Well, for instance, we volunteered to take the state graduation exam and the state SAT 10s. And we were told that no, as a private school, those tests are secure and they're normed to the state. So we couldn't take those tests. So, you know, I can't say here are my test scores and your test scores. However, we took the national version and, you know, we can say, well, our test scores, we took the SAT 10s, but the nationally normed ones, not the state ones. So it was the state who didn't allow it rather than us.
This is for Dr. Rountree. Would private funding sources impact specific choice on school curriculum, teacher selection, or other aspect of school culture?
Say that again.
No, I know.
How does private funding impact the school's curriculum, the teacher selection, or other aspects of the school culture?
They mean private funding? Did you mean like from the parent, that the
Right.
parent chose it?
The fact that your parents pay tuition, how might that impact your curriculum and the teachers that you choose?
Well, I guess if you were a startup school, maybe you would feel swayed by those choices if the parents felt strongly one way or the other. I don't know. You know, we're a bunch of strong former public school teachers, so we're not very swayed, so I don't know.
Dr. Stallworth, you talked about there's a need for innovation in public schools. What specific non-charter innovations do you support for public schools?
We've talked a lot of, use the word flexibility so much, and if that's what one of the marks of a good charter school is, that they have the flexibility to budget, to allocate resources, to hire the kinds of teachers that they see as effective teachers, then I think we still have the capacity in this state, in our public school system. Let's allow that kind of flexibility, that principals can get together with families in their communities, bring them in and have some kind of governing structure where those innovations can be talked about, whether it's a longer school day, which, you know, that's been around, Emily, for a long time, an extended school day, whether it's, in the mornings or in the afternoons or whatever it might be. So what are those structures, and let's determine what those structures are. Is it offering more arts, finding the resources to offer art and education in our public schools, because the research does show that those kinds of extracurriculars impact positively student performance. So I just go back to the idea that I think that we still have the capacity to improve education in this state. Let's require those local school systems to explore those ways and apply for those flexibility measures at the State Department, and get together with people who understand curriculum, who understand what effective and rigorous curriculum look like, and make those changes. Because again, if that's what we keep going back to, the primary reason that charter schools work, or why proponents say they work, then we can try that in this state. And I don't see why we need another structure if that's where we want to get to.
Why hasn't it happened though? Sorry.
So, yeah, I mean the mandates. I go to Westlawn Middle School every Thursday. One of my favorite young teachers quit 2 weeks ago because she was fed up with the mandates of testing, the way that she had to do curriculum in her classroom. So that's another young teacher who has left that school that needs strong teachers, because she felt that she had no other choice if she wanted to teach the way that she knew, and that she was prepared, and that she practiced teaching. So in those kinds of situations, what are principals to do when the State Department was coming into Westlawn the next day to do yet another evaluation of what was going on there? So why it doesn't happen, That's right. I mean, because we lose teachers who would otherwise unlock kids' minds and help them be the best people that they can be.
Ms. Marlowe, what innovations are supported by AEA?
Well, we've supported several throughout the years. In fact, when Emily and I first met, I just come from working directly with the school in Talladega County, where the superintendent went in, public school, low performing school, they had not made AYP, and the superintendent went in, asked the school board for a free hand, for them to allow her to put in the innovations that she wanted, for them to give her 3 years, and that those children adequate yearly progress. That was one of the standards under the former, well, the old No Child Left Behind that Alabama used to be under. And she went in and did it within 2 years, had those kids. She hired a principal that she knew would be a strong academic leader and gave him a free rein on the faculty that he wanted to hire in that school. He went to extended days.
And
he went to home visited.
To fire some that weren't doing their jobs.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, and the school board put all the money she requested into the school, so money was not an object. They gave her as much as she wanted. And then after they made headlines all over the country because they had done it, they had achieved, the school board members got jealous of the amount of money that they were spending on that one school because they wanted to build football stadiums in different areas of the county, and she was told that her contract would not be renewed, and she's now the superintendent in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and doing a fabulous job. But every step of the way we worked together with that process because we knew that she understood as an educational leader what it took to produce an effective school, that it didn't matter what the zip code of the child might be, that if she could put some of her effective teaching strategies in place with the principal that she had handpicked and paid him, he was the second highest paid employee in the school system, which that's one of those things that people at the central office didn't like that much, that you have to deal with in local school systems. But she meant that she was going to do it, and she showed that it could be done.
I want to thank our panelists here this evening for taking time to come and talk to us about an issue that they're passionate about. And I know many of you in this room are very passionate about the issue of education in general, whether it be through charter schools or whatever the issue might be related to public education. I want to give you my comments, and my comments are that in the study of public policy, it's amazing how we spend lots of time looking at issues. And in public policy, we never really solve problems completely. We haven't solved poverty, we haven't solved healthcare, and we haven't solved education. But we can put policies and procedures and legislation in place that make things better and lift people up, or we can put policies and procedures in place that make it harder on people. And so we've heard different ideas here this evening on how to improve public education in the state. I want you to think about it and how that the decisions that we make and the decisions that you talk to our representatives and our members of the legislature and our executive branch, how that you can talk to them about specific ideas to improve public education in the state, because we all want to see schools become better. Thank you for being here this evening, and I want David to come and wrap it up for us.
Yes, before you all leave, two things. One is that you have a feedback form everyone should have gotten when they walked in. That's critical to unlock as an organization. That's how we improve to make sure we're meeting our goals. Fill that out real briefly. We should have a quantitative and a qualitative section. Turn it in the back once you leave. Also, if you're interested in knowing more about Unlocked, we're a nuanced organization that inspires, informs, and mobilizes a network on campus of educational advocates. Sign up in the back for our newsletter. We'll give you meeting times and more events coming up, including a symposium where we'll have 6 to 10 nonprofits that are hiring wonderful, young, energetic people for internships, for graduate schools, and for volunteer opportunities. That'll be in mid-February. So thank you again. Thank you, Dr. Westbrook, the panel. We're so excited to continue this conversation. Have a wonderful night. Thanks, guys. Thank you guys very much.